I
What do you think?
I can jump in on that and then turn it over to Robert and Jordan. But I spend a lot of time at charging stations, and I was at a charging station recently where one of the technicians had to drive up from, I'm in Northern California, from Southern California to fix the machine. And then there was a machine next to it that was also broken. And I was asking the technician whether they were going to fix that one. And they said, oh, no, they don't have a ticket for that. So they were going to be back in Los Angeles and then have to come back up again. So I would say there's no doubt that we have a shortage of skilled labor.
What about you, Jordan? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of a numerous number of issues, including parts availability and being able to depot those parts, along with the ability to, handle a variety of different pieces of equipment and make sure that you have the right people at the right place at the right time. So yes, it's there's all sorts of operational challenges on the overall maintenance. I do think, though, that just is perhaps slightly controversial that, how these chargers were deployed is also a big challenge. If you look at even a gas station, shudder for me to say such a thing in this kind of a webinar, but if you look at that, typically there's 8, 10, 15, 20 different pumps at that location of a gas station. I've looked at this anecdotally, and often one or more of them isn't working. But at the end of the day, a driver going up to one of those locations knows that the other ones will work, and it doesn't matter where they end up driving to. And I think Tesla has figured that out, where in the earlier days they were doing fairly small locations, fairly small number of chargers at a location, 4, 6. Now I was at a Tesla charging location recently where I didn't count them, but there must have been 150 charging location ports. So if a few of those aren't working, it doesn't really matter because you just pull up to the next one, or you can tell that it's visually not working. And I think what we did as an industry early on that's a mistake, and I hope we are working toward fixing that, is that we're not just building these 1 and 2 charging port locations, because it really makes it hard to keep that location up. And from a driver perspective, they're just expecting to charge. They don't really think about it on a charger by charger basis.
I like your perception and the comparison to the gasoline pumps there. In fact, we got a question here coming through. Are there opportunities to integrate those serving the petroleum industry to meet uptime threshold? 97% uptime is considered a fail in that industry, and most require 99% or higher. Now, I was in the solar industry and in the operations and maintenance, and we had a 99% uptime guarantee. You think that we're being a little 97% is being a little lapse, guys? What do you think? Our expectations should be rose. Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think the simplistic answer is probably yes. I think it would be down to those organizations or those individuals and their willingness to want to work on those things. Jordan, I think your hub comment is a fantastic point. We did this in the UK in a previous life of mine. Still very big in the European Union, generally speaking, very different geographical constraints, of course. But the hub model allows you to augment a lot of that, the required expertise, the required maintenance, et cetera. And so I think it facilitates a more efficient process in terms of uptime, as well as user experience, to your other point, Jordan. I think ultimately, yes, there is going to be a need to be a shift in the industry. Rue, to your first question, there is a gap. There absolutely is. And I think that as the industry continues to evolve and investments are continued to be made, that will get better. And to answer your second question, I think if we want to continue to see these trends, and Carleen, hopefully we meet those goals. I may be a little more skeptical than you, but if we want to continue to meet those, I absolutely think the uptime will need to increase. I just think it's it's a no-brainer. It has to give the confidence to end users that the chargers will be available when they need them.
Yeah, and I had a couple of follow-up comments, Ruth, if that's okay.
Yes, indeed.
So one of the reasons I'm so bullish that we're going to meet that 2030 goal is that Tesla is opening up. And I think that is going to have a dramatic impact on the market, both from consumer adoption perspective, as well as competitively, that the rest of the industry is really going to have to make the 99% uptime if they want to compete. I also wanted to point out something Jordan talked about, the gas station model, which I think is imperative, that we have so many different accessible ports at a central hub. But the one of the challenges is that it's very difficult for a user to, believe it or not, it is, plug in their car, make the payment system. Oh, that didn't work. They have to unplug, put it back, start over again. That is very different than the gas station experience, where it's very easy to go through these steps if it's working. And by and large, if a pump isn't working, there's a sign on it saying out of order. So it's really quite a different thing. And I think one of the opportunities, though, is plug and charge, which is what Tesla uses, which I think the industry, as we move towards that it will simplify what the consumer needs to do to actually get a charge started. So I think it will become less onerous and less of a problem if a few stations are down, if we have a lot of them together, and that they can have an easier experience.
So going back to the comment about spare parts, our manufacturers being held responsible for the lack of parts or replacement units. What do you guys think about spare parts? How are we going to tackle that one, Jordan? I mean, you got some experience there.
Yeah, for sure. It's a challenge. I mean, look, the reality is too, a lot of the chargers that are at issue are older generation chargers. So if you're putting yourself in the shoes of the hardware manufacturer, which were partners of mine for many years, they have to make decisions about whether they're going to support the demand of new charger sales with new generation parts, or be able to support old chargers that they've already deployed and sold. And that's not an excuse at all, but that's a big challenge for them. And I think that's what we're feeling in the industry now. I think what we're going to have to do ultimately, though, is deploy and to meet these goals that you mentioned, Drew, we're going to have to deploy a lot more chargers, and the amount of chargers that are already in place are going to be eclipsed by the new chargers that are in the field. And so I think, practically speaking, we just have to get it right and better this time, right? With the right maintenance, with the right parts that are available, with the right serviceability of those particular chargers, and try to improve how we've been doing it going forward, with the right people, the right training, the right education, all the things that Rob and Carleen had already mentioned going forward. That's really my perspective on it all.
Yeah, you mentioned, I mean, there's a massive business opportunities all over the world, Rob, for installations. I mean, you pointed out, Jordan, there will be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of electric vehicles that are going to want to charge. So we got another question coming up there. So expanding on the idea, oh no, that's it? Okay, I was going to say, let's go back to the installation. Rob, you got some experience on the other side of the globe. I mean, I just came from England, and we seem to have, number one, the same problem about the reliability factor. People don't want to buy a car because even the chargers that are in there. Talk about installation opportunities for people that are listening all over the globe right now.
Sure. I mean, maybe I'll start with the challenge, since Carleen had to do that too, and we'll be in the same boat together. Look, the biggest challenge from my perspective when it comes to installation, particularly when you're talking about multiple chargers, i.e. more than a handful, is the electrical capacity at sites. And that is the challenge that we always run into. In the UK, that was a little easier from us for an installation perspective because of some of the relationships that we held. But ultimately, that was a big challenge. Not only was it difficult and timely to plan and schedule for that alongside an installation. These units are not particularly complicated. You can take it, you can install it in the ground. We use teams that, back to the petroleum engineer point on petrol stations, we used engineers that were just civil engineers and a couple of electrical engineers that collectively could install these chargers in less than a day, a handful of them in less than a day. The blocking factor was always the utilities. In the US, that's an even bigger challenge given the nature of the structure of utilities here. I think when it comes to capacity for install, though, Rue, unlike capacity for O&M on the maintenance side, is I think that there's a lot of companies across the globe, particularly from my experience in Europe and the US, that don't have a challenge whatsoever in installing chargers. I think back to Carleen and what Carleen and Jordan were saying, though, is that it's fine to just install chargers, and that's great, but there's a more holistic solution that I think needs to be contemplated, whether that's from a training aspect, that's from a technology aspect. I mean, look at the list of chargers. JLL recently did an RFI for charging manufacturers. We had something like over 30 responses of companies that wanted to sell us equipment. I could find the installers tomorrow. I can find the equipment tomorrow, but there's a whole host of other constraints that we've been talking about on this call that I think need to be factored into that installation process, Rue, as you go into that eyes wide open.
Can I comment on that? I had a question for Jordan. Jordan, I was wondering, so in the gasoline world, the auto manufacturers are required to maintain parts for 10 years. And I'm wondering about if there was, if there was a mandate that there needed to be parts available, certain hubs. Does that resolve the issue, or is it really a supply chain issue, a cost issue?
Well, I mean, a mandate will fix those other things, right? So but I think there are other challenges, right? I mean, I didn't live within a manufacturer or a charger OEM, so I can't speak directly to that. But I lived around it long enough that it's probably an economics or financial issue, right? At the end of the day, they're more driven to sell more new chargers than they are to build parts. So to the extent you can fix that either by mandating it, or which I'm sure no one would like, or incenting in other ways the ability to have those parts available, then that would be part of the answer for sure. For sure. I mean, I do think, though, if I could comment on what Rob was just talking about, I do think that's the gap there. And one of the challenges, and this is to anyone who's going to put together an RFP for charging, whether it's JLL, which is a very large organization, or anyone smaller. And I think the one big challenge that is often overlooked is that customers of that ilk think first that they need to buy chargers. And the reality is, because that's like the most obvious thing. Okay, I need to put a charger in the ground. And maybe second, they think, oh, I need somebody to install that. Clearly, I'm biased, but I actually think that those are not the two most important things. I think it's the service and the solution that's ultimately going to put all of this together that's the most important. And the reality is that customers don't think that way. And so, and the way the market has evolved is that those service providers and solution providers are not often the prime providers of the overall system. And ultimately they end up getting like this tertiary kind of position. And that puts, that ultimately puts the project and the ongoing support of the project at a significant disadvantage on an ongoing basis.
So we get another question come through for installation. How many projects have been carried out as a public-private partnerships? What do you see as the role of public-private partnerships in driving the installation and maintenance forward? Is there a role to play in skill development as well? Carleen, I'll put that question over to you.
Yeah, sure. I think ultimately there has to be a public-private partnership, and then we need to switch over to just pure private investment. Taxpayers will only fund this to a certain degree. So I think that there's absolutely a space and a requirement for that.